Welcome.
Welcome everybody. It's ages since I did one of these, so I thought now is the time to do another one. So I'm going to base it off the last video that I did, which is 3M10 Start Your Engines. But before the engines start, there's a bit of a sneaky Sibulba who comes up and tries to sabotage Anakin's pod. So we'll have a look at it. So here I've got the short score that I did last week. By the way, if I'm looking up there, it's because I've got two monitors and I can't work out how to not have my photo distorted or camera distorted. Anyway, there we go. I hope you'll appreciate the background. Look as though I'm in some sort of vampiric mansion. Excuse me. Right, okay, so let's get into it. So one of the things that really interested me about this was the fact that he's got quite a stringent atonalism, which you can see in the flutes, flutter-tongue flutes and violins at the beginning, which are just semitones. Like that. And you got this sort of maraca, sort of snake-like sort of hissing sound going on as well, which is also really interesting, just sort of for ambience as well. But then you've got these really extraordinary chords, which are stopped horns and bass clarinet, and then gradually bassoon and other things come in as well. And then it gets really, really dark. But there's something sort of very, 1950s film noir about it. And I was trying to sort of work out, where does it all come from? And I think one of the main things that I was struck by, that it almost certainly comes from the double harmonic minor scale. So this is a scale which I will get into by going to my window and just talking about it a little bit. So in this piece, it's kind of in G. At least it starts off in G, although it's a bit difficult to tell when you've just got that. But generally speaking, the notes are drawn from this double harmonic minor scale starting on G. So this really is the note. The fourth is raised by a semitone from the standard harmonic minor. So you could pick any harmonic minor. Let's do C. And let's raise the fourth. Let's do D. Let's raise the fourth. Interestingly enough, I was reading, I think it's Donald Cope, Techniques of the Contemporary Composer, which is quite a common book to have on film music courses and things like that. But he doesn't mention that at all, which is strange because it's used in so many areas. It's not quite the same thing as the octatonic scale that we've been sort of, not necessarily discussing, but I hope you've been aware of throughout most of the Phantom Menace, and also the hexatonic scales as well. That sort of semitone, three semitones, semitone, three semitones. But the other one is this scale. So if you go online, if you just go online, type in the notes into a pitch class set calculator, it will give you, it reduces to this scale here. Which is a very different sort of scale in some ways. But if you started on the fourth degree, so in a sense it's a bit like a mode, so mode 4. So let's start on the F, but don't change any of those notes. We get exactly the same as that, 722, double harmonic minor scale, but more commonly referred to as the Hungarian minor scale. You might have seen that. And if you go on Wikipedia, you will see it, because that's what it's called. And there's all sorts of interesting symmetrical properties, and they mentioned Bartók, who is extremely fond of symmetry. The author Ernst Lenvai Basically did an entire book about symmetry and golden sections and all sorts of different things like that. But it is interesting when you analyse that scale. So what I've done here is, I should have changed that to an A flat really, shouldn't I? But never mind, I'll keep it like that. No, I won't, I'll change it. There we go. Makes it a little bit clearer. Always good to, when you're doing a scale, to have different letter names in the scale, not G natural and G sharp. So we can see all the C's are coloured red. So this is just a scale going down in the second voice. Like that. So it's this scale, Hungarian minor scale, but starting on C and ending on C. And then ascending. So what's rather nice is that those notes are the same. Like that as well. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily use an entire composition based like that. Although you could. And you can see the extreme dissonance that you get with those sort of central sections to it. But it does give all sorts of more interesting possibilities than just a harmonic minor scale. So it's that raised fourth, that sort of, I guess you could even call it a Lydian harmonic minor scale because of the raised fourth. That's what it implies. Except that, of course, Lydian is usually major, and this is minor. But anyway, I was sort of trying to work out where the notes come from just those dyads. Because the thing is, it's fine to talk about harmony, but what happens when you don't have the third note? How can you tell what chord it is? And really you can't. So I've done a sort of little pitch class set analysis of it, saying, well, that's set 4-5, that's for Z29. They all have sort of slightly strange names. But it is interesting that, you know, certain sets are repeated as well. So, for example, in this sort of E flat add 4 type chord. So that just means an E flat chord and add a fourth to it. And you can create scales out of these things, and I think that's what Williams tends to do. He sort of goes on flights of fancy. I'm sure he doesn't sort of necessarily work them out beforehand, but he'll instinctively just choose this sort of flavour depending upon what's happening on in the film. So when we hear it, and I'm going to go to the full orchestration at this point, which I have done as well, just so we can see a little bit of the orchestration, how it's done, because I always like looking at how it, you know, sort of transcribing from ear to page. So even just those flutes. So he's got 3 piccolos, which I think is marvellous. Look at that, all flutter tonguing. And then combined with everything else. And I mean, actually, that's significant, isn't it? That each section is divided into 3. There's no sort of... So it's as equal as it can be, given the amount of players that we have. I like that. Who did this one? John Neufeld? Neufeld? I don't know. Neufeld, I think. It's probably Neufeld. I'm not sure. Forgive me if I've got your name wrong. So that we've got E flat, D, and C sharp. So absolutely, you know, semitones apart. But I was interested in the melodic outline as well. But I'll come to that in a minute. Let's just hear it in context. And then there's a sudden relaxation of tension at that point as well. Really, really fantastic. So combining flutter tongue piccolos, or flutes, with divisi violins is a really nice sort of effect. You get that sort of nasal sound without having to resort to mutes. It's really clever. I mean, he possibly could have done. You would have had, you know, 3... almost 2 seconds to change. That's enough, but it's quite noisy, you know, to change from mute to unmuted and vice versa. in a session, so that's probably why he didn't. But also it just adds a little bit more colour. And then we've got first and third horn, it's quite sort of common, just doubling up. So sounding a D and a C sharp, I know it looks like an A and a G sharp, but it isn't. We can take it momentarily off that. It's just awkward when you're doing bass clarinet and B flat to put it back onto non-transcribing transcribing score. I can't speak, but never mind. So at this point, we'll go back to the reduction. And it's just, you get that lovely sort of, I love the fact that the bass clarinet is the lowest sounding instrument at that point, and you have these sort of nasal horns. Anyway, before I continue, the melodic outline, I drew a parallel. I think this is probably a bit of a long shot, to be perfectly frank, just because it has an outline of this. And the ear is drawn to that, actually, especially because there's a nice little gliss up to it as well. So it's like, hello, I'm here, sort of thing. There's an added bit of energy that goes up to it. And there's a sort of reminiscence of that theme, the Emperor theme, except without the minor second descent at the end. So it's sort of a hint of something's not right, something's a little bit dark, something sneaky is happening, without directly referencing the Emperor, because there's nothing to do with the Emperor at all at this stage, or Palpatine. And then he varies the notes here with the horns and the previous dyad that we had with G and E flat. And it just changes slightly. And I think that's possibly because he's going into a change. He's almost preparing for a slight change in direction as it goes into a nice sort of tonal section at this point in bar 8. So it's a relaxation of tension. And you can see it also in the fact there's long note values, there's diminuendo, there's a long note at the end, and it moves immediately into something else with this pulsing that we've got sort of with the viola and the harp repeating the A, just to give it a little bit of momentum. So it hasn't stopped completely, but he's also just changed the colour somewhat by adding a couple of muted trombones as well. Yeah, I sort of said a good example of the wrong bass. So I think, you know, most of us would have gone, instead of with an added wrong bass, and maybe put an E flat in, but he doesn't do that, just to maintain that little bit of tension as well. Then we've got a really lovely sort of chord progression to a first inversion chord, a lovely device that Williams uses all the time, and then sort of dyads over the top with... and you need all of those notes for it to work. It doesn't work if you only use the upper notes. It just seems very distant or thin. You need the second violins at that point as well. So they're both divisi, I think. Over here. Yes. So let's just go from there. It's lovely sort of convergent string writing at this point. So this is the precursor to the force theme that happens with, what have we got? Clarinet, open horn, and to a certain extent sort of harp just filling in a little bit of the colour of the harmony. But I really like this passage in the cellos where it's interesting because from a, I guess, a harmonic, strict harmonic point of view, we've got second inversion, so they're always sort of quite difficult when you're doing, you know, I guess you would call it standard harmony, school harmony, college harmony, because the second version doesn't exist on its own. It's always with something else, because it contains a dissonance of a fourth. So that's my normal A minor triad. A, C, and E. First inversion. Second inversion, I will probably just write this down, I think. So let's just choose a new little bit. Create a few more bars. You'll notice my template for everything I do. So second version will have the fifth in the bass, but that interval of a fourth is a dissonance, and so in strict terminology that has to be prepared somehow, sounded, and then resolved. In other words, that A has to be copied in the same part in a previous beat, harmonic beat, and then it needs to resolve somewhere, and usually it will resolve downwards. And there are different examples of the way second inversions are used. So you can have a cadential second inversion, or cadential 6/4 it's called, because of the figuring. 4 notes, 6 notes, 6/4, to a 5/3 chord, which is just a root position chord. And that's called a cadential 6/4. So it's not really, I guess it is used in the Baroque quite a lot, but not as much as 2/7B 5/1 is used, or 2/7 in first inversion, like that. But it's more of a classical period device, but it's still prepared, sound, and resolved. The other one is a sort of passive cadence, which is sort of the same, but actually it's a type of plagal cadence. And, you know, that was often used by Bach. Much later on, Schubert, Mendelssohn used it quite a lot because he was a huge Bach fan. Then we've got the auxiliary 6/4, which is what I generally tend to call the Elton John 6/4. There we go. And it's just a shift up from a 5/3 chord, and you shift up 2 of the notes, 1 step, and then back down again. So I don't quite know why it did that. That's very strange. It just sort of suddenly disappeared. But anyway. So basically that's what I mean. So you've got your 5/3 here. Whoops. And then it goes to a 6/4. And then back to 5/3. And that's called an auxiliary 6/4. And then the last one is something called a passing 6/4, where it behaves like a passing note, but it's a passing chord. So it's a chord in between 2 other chords, which fills in scale movement as well. Anyway, there's a long digression, really, because it doesn't really help, but I'm just trying to say where it comes from. So that here we then have an ambiguity. So by the time 6/4s or second inversions are used in modern music, or I guess 20th century and beyond, there's much less restriction on on how they're used. I mean, this one isn't a second inversion necessarily. It's just that it is in the upper voices, but it's not in terms of what's going on, because it's just a root position chord. And then we've got actually a B7. So it's slight. I guess you could still call it B with an A, but it's, I guess, B7. It's not quite, though. There's no F sharp. And again, it's just a way of Williams not quite being as strict with this theory stuff as you need to be. Once you've done it all, you can do what you want, really. When the parts converge, you get this incredible sound. Whoops, gone to the wrong thing. Where the cello takes over. So it does become a second inversion at that point, because that's the lowest sounding pitch. So we've got lots of... There's only one instrument playing an A at that point. Everybody else, I guess, doubled in the harp, but everybody else is playing E's and C's. So the E is double. So the fifth of the original root position is doubled. And also it's momentarily that F sharp is doubled as well. And then it appears as again in the first violins. Isn't that interesting? Just the way those parts converge. Let's just listen. It's really remarkable. What happens if he had just stayed on the A and not done that little quaver? Let me just highlight those. I'm interested. It just adds a little bit of momentum, doesn't it? There's just a small amount of momentum, as if they're sort of coalescing, those notes. Really, really interesting. Actually, and what it does, it allows the cello to really push through, because that note's higher than the viola F sharp at that stage. But it glides through a little bit more, rather than sort of suddenly stands out because the viola's joined them. So it coalesces onto the same note. Really fascinating. I do like this. So then we've got the fourth theme. So here, one thing to point out, I think, is that when we're writing melodies and harmony and tunes, it's very easy just to resort to a root position chord. And it's much more brave or bold to not do that, which is why there's no E in the chord here at this point. Because I think if you add it, it's just a bit too much. Yeah, you don't get the relaxation onto the main beat of bar 12, and also that E is now really interfering with the F sharp that you got here. I know it doesn't look like an F sharp, but it is. It's suddenly converted to an F sharp because it's in transpose score. Bang, there we go. So I think that's the reason. It's interesting to note that every single note is so carefully thought out. And we've got this lovely bit of harp going on as well, where the C is attached to the E minor. This is something that gets talked about in Andy Hill's book, where you have an E minor chord with an added sixth. And it's an interesting one because the C wants to resolve to the B, and the B wants to resolve to C. So we've got this sort of, it could go either way, as he puts it, the red pill or the blue pill. It just adds a little bit of colour, those added sixths, which is all over Williams, let's face it. You know, very, very common to have that added sixth. It just adds colour. And with the F sharp as well, you get that lovely sort of, almost sort of oriental, I guess, or what Westerners would call oriental. Flavour as well with the F sharp. It's really, really beautiful. Partly because it's in the melody. So the chord doesn't change on the F. But you sort of need to reharmonise it because of the G tends to get in the way of it. So by offsetting it with other notes, you can get away with it. It's very specific, but there we go. And then the bass comes in for added depth. Without it, it's kind of in a hiatus, and then there's substance, there's destiny at this point. Boom. Lovely, and a really, really nice bit of the classic imitation. You know, it's the thing that composition teachers go on about all the time. You know, that little bit of imitation. It's signposting. It's a way of fixing something in the memory, because if it's repeated somewhere, you'll fix it in the memory more. And it's also a little call and response as well. So if we just have the violas And the clarinet. Nice. And it's a lovely bit of colour as well that we get. Not forgetting also the way the cellos really soar up and then back down. And then almost as if they have a sort of extension, but it's just the double bass is playing. With a nice open chord where you remove the third from the mud. That's awful. Just sounds really muddy. Can be very effective though, don't get me wrong. But when you want something like this, it's not great. So we've got our basic triad there. Roots doubled, and in fact all the notes are doubled here. Notice there's no C sharp in the first violin. Because otherwise it gets in the way of the E melody. If we put a C sharp in, let's see what happens. No. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm so used to hearing it without. But yes, it doesn't quite work, I don't think, in my view. Then, after this beautiful fourth theme, we go into the wonderful sort of fanfare stuff. So, open parallel fifths. That's interesting spelling. I'm going to just leave it. I can't be bothered to change it now. And then we get full trumpets and trombones as well, with these little interjections. So when I was doing this, what was really interesting is after that bit, and it's all just basic triadic chords, they do sound wonderful. And they're all in imitation, so it's just the same triplet, sort of dotted triplet figure, da ba da bum, da da ga da ba, like that. And then we've got something which doesn't happen in the film. So yeah, really, really tremendous writing. Sounds slightly strange on Note Performer, I think, but you know, we can't have everything. So little woodwind interjections, and everything is, you know, pretty much diatonic in the sense of moving. Yeah, I mean, it's diatonic, but it's not chromatic until it gets to be chromatic. I suppose that is chromatic, isn't it? But we don't really notice it, really. And it's not necessarily... Let me get this amazing chord, 419. So, or merely just D major over a B flat is probably a better way of thinking about it. And that happens in Williams a great deal. But what's interesting is that the bass line itself is Jabba the Hutt's theme from Return of the Jedi. So do check that out when you have a chance. Which I think is played originally on the tuba. Here it's sort of cellos, basses, bassoons, contra, trombone, and tuba. And then you've got this extraordinary sort of lip gliss horns, all six of them at this point, and joining in the bass line. So yeah, really, really nice writing at this point, and orchestration where everything's very separated. I like his use of combining trombones and horns quite often, and even together as well. It's really interesting just listening to the brass section on its own. go. And in fact, it comes to here. Yeah, and then gradually tails off. Oh, didn't mean to start it all over again. We've had enough of that. So yeah, just brilliant bits of imitation, filling in triads when you need to, also not necessarily having them when you don't need them. So when we've got this... it just has a good contrast with those sort of dyadic moments of diminished... What is it? A, B, C, D. It's diminished fourth. No, augmented fourth. Yeah, nice. So, just a good example of excellent brass writing, contrasting themes, counterpointing fanfares with Jabba the Hutt's theme, because that's what's on view at that point as he's sort of is about to bite the head off that little creature and then start the race. Yeah, combined with the four seam, I think it's a nice little cue, and so I thought I'd talk about it a little bit. I have also just put here that a lot of the open sounds that he tends to use with just the last little bit is quartal quintal harmony. In other words, harmony based on fourths and fifths, basically the same thing. So an A above D is a fifth, but an A below D is a fourth. So people say quintal harmony, quartal harmony. It's basically the same thing. Fifths. It just changes chord. So it's sort of around D minor, A minor and G minor, but it's not quite because of the lack of third. But that's what's going on. And you get a sort of very forceful power with it as well. I like the unusually low trumpets at that point. He doesn't write low trumpets very much at all. So it's interesting when you get them. Yeah, so here. Sort of not quite the bottom of the range, but it's interesting. Yeah, and you've got that cascading cadence where the trumpets start it, the horns follow, and then the trombones follow for a third time as well. In interesting arrangements where, yeah, the third and fourth playing the same note, I guess so is the first and second as well, but they go from four on one note to 2 on one as well. It's just little changes of colour at that point as well. So next time I need to get on with the next cue, and I will be doing that shortly. So in the meantime, hope you enjoy this small recording. Bye for now.